Chapter 8, Day 3, Sphere 2, Tehuti. Tehuti is the faculty through which knowledge is acquired. We must distinguish, however, between knowing and having information. Knowing, a function of the second sphere of the tree of life, is having direct experience of reality, while being informed, a function of the eighth sphere of the tree of life, is having definitions, descriptions, names, and narratives, explanation of realities via symbols about something. Knowing versus being informed are direct antagonists to each other. 2 plus 8 equals 10. Knowing is a process that begins in the visual processing of the right side of the brain and culminates in the unification of reality and the two brain hemispheres, while becoming informed takes place in the left side of the brain and culminates in the total separation of reality and two hemispheres of the brain. Tehuti's function of equilibrating or unifying Tehuti's function of equilibrating or unifying the two hemispheres of the brain is built into the deity's name. It is a puncept based on the accidental concordance of separate meanings of the word tehu, to utter, and to measure in the attributes of the deity. Tehuti, the dual utterances. A meaning of the name of the deity is made up of tehu, to utter, and ti, dual. It is a condensation of the fact that reality is conveyed to us through two sources. One is the left side of the brain, which breaks up the world into finite components and time sequences, and the other, the right side of the brain, which focuses on the unity of the things in the world. These two sources of communication about reality is also dualized into high and low. We therefore receive communications from the upper and lower left side of the brain, from the upper and lower right side of the brain, as well as unified brain messages from high and low perspectives. This dualization of the brain with its spiritual counterparts is an answer to the need to focus on particulars, static or moving, time condition, in certain instances, and the need to focus on the whole and unity at other times. We must note that they are the direct opposite of each other, yet together they make up the totality or unit of communication. The great problem in the world is that some people function more out of the left and others function more out of the right, so that they both have an unbalanced perspective in the world. Given the fact that mankind functions predominantly through the lower left hemisphere of the brain, Sphere 8, Sebek, due to its precedence in the evolutionary and growth scheme of man, it is held in most cultures, except the Western, as the prime source of problems. As if it wasn't enough that this faculty, by splitting the world into finite parts, hides the unity between things, its communications are based on verbal or phonetic thoughts. In other words, we hear about the reality through it. This is the intellectual, syllogistic, logical faculty that we measure through IQ tests, which excels in communicating finite concrete ideas, in addition to the definitions and descriptions that make up technological processes, chemistry, mathematics, etc., and the world of effects. But not everything in the world fits neatly into definitions, descriptions, and linear logic. Like a carpenter who only has a hammer, and therefore every every carpentry accessory looks like a nail, the man who has not transcended the lower left side of the brain, the Sahu man, tries to use this faculty to communicate all reality, and therein lies the mischief. This mischief is compounded by the ingrained belief that most people, that information is knowledge. We must note that to know is to have direct perception and experience of the reality, and to be informed is to know a symbol representing the reality. It matters not how well you define or how vividly and poetically you describe a banana. You don't know until you hold it in your hands, smell it, see it, and eat it. One of the greatest areas of mischief in the world has come from the mistaking of information received about God, the subconscious, the spirit, for knowledge of these realities. Symbol representing the thing to be known. Path of information, 8th sphere function. The knower, and the path of knowledge, 2nd sphere function. The above diagram shows that seeking information, reading, hearing, takes the knower, A, to the symbol, B, the stand-in, definition, name, description, narrative, reasoning, of the thing to be known, C, while knowing takes the knower, A, straight to the object of knowledge, C. Being informed is knowing the explanation, definition, and description of a thing, but not the thing itself. The source of conflict in the world. Consider the fact that the intellect, the 8th sphere, Sebek, the faculty that mankind relies on predominantly to communicate reality to itself, 1. Communicates not reality but symbols of it, 2. Can establish the logical connection between things and ideas, but lacks the means of establishing whether the premise of the logical operation is true or false, and 3. What is communicated is hearsay. It thinks verbally or phonetically. We have definitions and descriptions of things, of God, of the Spirit, of ourself, etc., but no direct experience of these things, and 4. Hides the unity between things, and thus speaks to us of a world in which things seem to exist by and for themselves and are in intrinsic conflict with other things. It is truly a source of tremendous conflict, for the simple fact that the majority of people do not have the experience of an alternative mental input, and they do not have the slightest inkling of the downside of a faculty that has sent probes to the depths of the galaxy. In many non-Western cultures, the intellect has been metaphorically represented by symbols of cleverness, jackals, baboons, dogs, rats, foxes, etc. It is the trickster and mischief maker deity Ilegba of the Yoruba culture, Kweku Anansi of the Akan culture, Hermes, the planet Mercury, Sebku, Sebek in the Kamitic culture, chief strategist of Set, one of the arch principles of evil in Kamitic philosophy, which later became the Satan of Christianity, etc. It is worthy to note that in the English language, the word for the right side symbolizes what is right, and the left hand, as in the left-hand path, symbolizes black magic. Our word sinister is derived from the Latin siniestra, which means left. According to the Jewish version of the Kabbalah, cosmologics, Tao, man comes into the world accompanied by 2 angels, One sits on the left side and entices him to do wrong, while the other sits on the right side and gives him good counsel. A survey of the folkloric and mythological literature will reveal hundreds of references to the left side, cleverness, and jackals, and so on, as a symbolic of the prime sources of conflict in the world. Take, for example, the definition, man is a rational animal. It presents the totality of man through two of his faculties, the intellect and the physical body, which has been mistaken for an animal. The real animal is an electromagnetic body that animates the physical body and is the source of emotional expressions, sensory phenomena, and sense perceptions. It is also present in the mineral and vegetal kingdoms. Not only is man being fragmented by this definition, it also presents as his essence two of the lowest parts of his or her being, spheres 8 and 10. The effect of such a definition on man's spiritual quest, civilizing efforts, societal building, and so on, has to be severely limiting and warping. Fools will try to understand the essence of man through the study of animal behavior. They will use animal social behaviors as models for human society, and so on to the inducement of nausea. And, of course, they will not seek to transcend their animal nature. Why is having sex making love? Why is an emotion the evidence of honesty? I was honest, I told you how I felt. And sincerity. Note that emotions are expressions of the animal spirit. Take Webster's New World Dictionary definition of pleasure, a thing that gives delight or satisfaction, as another example. It makes a thing the source of pleasure, as opposed to an expression of one's conditioning towards a thing. If you accepted Webster's definition, you would have problems with giving up, or being denied, or losing certain things, not only because you believe that pleasure cannot be had without the thing, and that these things are sources of pleasure, at least as perceived by you, but because you believe that pleasure must be found in things. This is the source of serious conflicts in the world, and a great impediment to spiritual cultivation. People will be quick to condemn the man who killed his wife, because not being able to have her concluded that his source of joy and pleasure was taken away from him, yet the same people would never dream of looking into the common beliefs and mental processes that inevitably lead to such an act as one of its legitimate possibilities. It is evident, then, that man is in need of an alternative means of communicating realities to herself. The avoidance and resolution of conflict. Avoiding and resolving conflicts is one of the chief functions of Tehuti, the faculty of wisdom. It is the total antithesis of the intellect. While the latter derives its information from man's worldly experiences, the wisdom faculty gets its knowledge from God dwelling in man's spirit. In other words, for wisdom to manifest itself, we must shut down our intellectual and imaginative thought processes in order to receive the intuition from God dwelling within. In this state, where there are no thoughts, consciousness enters into the same state of hetep, nirvana, as described by the Agdod. There are, therefore, no thoughts, as in the syllogistic logical process that we can follow. All that can be given are instructions leading to the shutting down of the thought processes, making the mind blank, satori, which is the requirement for the functioning of the wisdom faculty. Since this faculty is not really of man, but belongs to God dwelling in one spirit, the procedure can be explained as the stilling of the thought processes of the intellect and the imagination in order to receive instructions from God. It is of interest to note that the Hu in Hu in Tehuti is the mantra, word of power, of the wisdom goddess Chinamasta of Black India, Indus Kush, and of the Guru wisdom chakra. It operates by suppressing the formation of thought processes, by cutting the mind off from the senses. This ties in with Kamitic spiritual science. Hu is metaphorized as Ptah's tongue, which utters the word of power that initiates the process of creation. It is also the deity of the senses, in which capacity it plays the same role as the mantra Hung of the Guru chakra. In other words, to shut the mind down, it must be cut off from its ports, its senses, to the outside world. This is, of course, a brief account of the process. The most important point to understand is that ultimately the most important part of the deity's name is Hu, understood not as a word with meaning, but as the word of power which leads to the manifestation of wisdom in the initiate. Tehuti, the dual measure. Since the wisdom faculty, in direct contrast to the intellect, does not arrive at its conclusions by manipulating thoughts, as there are none, there are no thought processes or models of thinking that can be followed. Yet the pronouncements from the wisdom faculty exhibit a structure that can be studied with great profit. What we must first understand is that there is a specific category of pronouncements or axioms that can be qualified as wisdom statements or words from God, Nefer. This category of statements exhibit a structure in which fundamental antagonists or opposites are equilibrated as indivisible dual components of a whole. It is based on a maxim that all units are based on underlying dual factors. In other words, fundamental conflicts only exist because of the inability to find a point through which they are found to be halves of a unit. The key point is equilibrium. Let's take the two opposing means of communication, the wisdom faculty, sphere 2, versus the intellect, sphere 8. Unlike the pseudo-Vedantic gurus, quote-unquote, who advocated the slaying of the mind, the intellect, as the source of Maya, illusion, the Kamitic tradition recognizes that it has a legitimate function in the scheme of life. The question is, how much weight is it going to be given in comparison to the wisdom faculty? It is obvious that the wisdom faculty is the greater in importance of the two, and must thus be assigned the greater weight. Equilibrium between unequals can be achieved through the appropriate placement of the fulcrum point. The wisdom faculty avoids conflicts between fundamental opposites by assigning each its place in space, hierarchical value or function, and time, order of manifestation. The equilibrating function of Tehuti can be seen in the ibis that serves as its chief icon. The ibis is well known for its ability to maintain its balance by standing on one leg for a great length of time. This act is also symbolic of great meditation powers. It would take great concentration for a human to reproduce such a feat. The equilibrating concept is also seen in another meaning of the word tehu, to measure, and ti, dual. The dual measurement is to be understood in the sense of the two sides of an algebraic equation, which is a fundamental underlying principle of science. In the world, Tehuti is the cosmic power that maintains the equilibrium of the shaping forces of the world. It corresponds to Vishnu, which, according to the Upanishads, is the divine principle of preservation. To summarize, the communications from the Tehuti faculty are utterances that explain the indivisible dualities underlying all units, i.e., that show how certain fundamental oppositions are really complementary halves of a whole. The Tehuti faculty enables us to find solutions that do not create new conflicts, especially when there are no precedents to serve as guides. It is obvious that the variables involved in the shaping of many of the issues in man's life, in economics, family, government, etc., are too complex and multifaceted for the intellect of man to handle. This is why, in spite of the great amount of information that has been collected in the world, mankind is sinking deeper into conflict. The solution is to be found in the fact that the Supreme Being dwells in man's spirit. In the past chapter, we discussed its unifying function, and now we will focus on its role of enabling man to solve his or her problems. As long as the indwelling divinity is kept slumbering, quotes unquote, in the unconscious, the divine intelligence, the wisdom faculty, is limited to the operation of the physiological mechanism and subconscious mental processes of our being. But through the observance of the laws governing the spirit and the carrying out of a series of spiritual practices, God's faculty of knowledge can be brought to the foreground of our lives. Western scientists seem incapable of realizing that their science is made possible by the scientific structure underlying the world. But who is responsible for the scientific nature of the world and of the scientist's brain capacity to think scientifically? Are we expected to believe that the world, with a scientific structure of which scientists declare that come the year 3000 AD, they will know no more than a drop of water in the Earth's oceans, an overstatement, is the creation of a mind that was created by the random coming together of dead atoms into a living thing? And even before these lifeless things supposedly came together by chance to life, their structure also reveals the work of an insuperable intelligence at work. Let's set this folly aside, once and for all, bow our heads down, and recognize that our physiological functions and subconscious support of our volitional life is the handiwork of the same great genius that made and sustains the world. Yes, God dwells inside each and every one of us. Conflict, duality, and a solution to all problems. Duality underlies all aspects of reality. Reality is fundamentally dualized into the source of creation, the subjective realm, and the world, the objective realm. Since the term objective denotes all objects or structured states of energy/matter, thoughts included, the term subjective realm, quotes unquote, in this book is used to denote the aspect of reality in which energy and matter are undifferentiated. Even the creative source of the world, the subjective realm, exhibits the dualization into the substantial basis of the world and being. These are in turn dualized into energy/matter, substantial basis, and consciousness/will, being. The objective realm exhibits the dualization into the causative plane, the noumenal, and the plane of effect, the phenomenal or physical realm. The noumenal plane, which is composed of the spheres 1 through 9, is divided into the divine divisions, spheres 1 through 3, and the division of man, spheres 4 through 9. And we can go on piling up dualizations. The important point to realize about the dual elements is that they are all opposites yet complementary in qualities to each other. The opposites are all indivisible halves of a whole. Deep meditation will show that the seemingly insurmountable conflicts that are affecting mankind have their basis in the fundamental dualities underlying the world. The wisdom faculty is able to sort out the types of conflicts that the rational intellect cannot handle and solve the major conflicts which are based on the fundamental dualities underlying the structure of the world. It does so by noting for each thing its place in time and or space, hierarchy. The rational intellect is incapable of solving these problems as the solution does not fit in with syllogistic thought procedures. One of the common and very influential errors that is committed from the absence of input from this part of being is the inputting of qualities into things when the qualities arise from the relationship to things or our conditioning towards them. For example, people think that there is a category of stressful things, ugly and beautiful things, medicines, poisons, painful events, etc. Introspection must be done to discover if you are guilty of such beliefs. 0 through 10 conflict, inner peace versus pleasure. We saw in chapter 6, during the discussion of 0/Amen, that our emotionality is directly antagonistic to manifesting the unshakable inner peace that is needed to bring forth our three shaping factors of our divinity: unity, wisdom, and spiritual power, spheres 1, 2, and 3, respectively. In other words, we cannot be at peace and emotional at the same time. We cannot achieve inner peace if we are still caught up in our emotional conditioning. While many initiates, unfortunately not too many, manage to understand why they must transcend the negative emotions and sensations, their association to illness and devitalizing effects, etc. Few are able to reconcile the idea of exchanging inner peace for pleasure. The enslavement comes from the intellect, which defines certain things as pleasurable, painful, etc., when there are no such things in the world. Pleasure and pain are not qualities in things, but expressions of a person's conditioned state. If you believe that beauty and sweetness are attributes that reside in a person or a thing that you are in love with, you will not be able to do without it. If you believe that liking or not liking, hurting or enjoying represent the natural state of your spirit, see chapter 6 regarding Hetep, then you will not be able to accept the idea of transcending these emotions. Fine, you say and ask, but must I live without joy or pleasure? Of course not. Joy and pleasure stimulate the production of beneficial hormones and assist in positively energizing the body and mind to invigorate them and maintain health. Man must learn to enjoy with the knowledge that pleasure is not a property of the object of enjoyment, but of one's conditioning. And in regards to that conditioning, it must be understood that it is a superimposition on one's natural state of peace, which we must be able to reestablish through the Tree of Life meditation at a moment's notice if and when necessary. The direct antagonistic relationship between Amen 0 and Geb 10 was symbolized by assigning the ram as an icon associated with Amen. In Kamitic symbolism, the ram represents the sexual drive, which can be considered a major manifestation of the pleasure principle in man. The offering of rams as sacrificial items in the rituals to Amen symbolized the subduing of the most powerful aspect of the animal nature in order to achieve inner peace, and through it, the triple powers of the indwelling God. The understanding of the importance and means of resolving this theme of conflict in our lives is critical to the adoption of a spiritual life, as many people resist to do so due to the fact that they cannot bring themselves to give up pleasure and joy in their lives. A great deal of mischief has been caused by many pseudo-gurus who told people that they must kill outside desire and pleasure in order to achieve the spiritual goal. We have seen how the wisdom faculty comes up with a solution that establishes and maintains the equilibrium between inner peace and pleasure. Enjoy, but know that a thing is not in itself enjoyable, and your enjoyment is not the essence of your being. And be able to reestablish the peace at will. This equilibrating function as the means of resolving conflicts is the highest function of the wisdom faculty. It features prominently in the iconography and epithets of Tehuti. It is he who made the combatant brothers Heru and Set go home in peace. He is the weigher of words and deeds on the night of overthrowing the enemies of Osar. He is the overseer of the weighing of the heart, will, of the initiate, and the deceased at the final judgment. Tehuti, the two proclamations or utterances, are the sets of antagonistic or conflicting truths, quotes unquote, that must be reconciled in life. This is why the deceased and the initiates at the final judgment or the final initiation are judged in the double hall or two halls of truth, Ma'ati. The 1 through 9 antagonism, the self versus the person. It is interesting that the word individual, which literally denotes an indivisible duality, was coined as a synonym for the word person, which bears no etymological or semantic resemblance or relationship to it. It was coined out of the understanding that there are two parts in man that compete for his identity. On the lower side, we have the complex of emotional and thought patterns that make up our person. And at the other end, we have God, with its attributes of unity, wisdom, and spiritual power dwelling in our spirit. It is the latter that we must identify with as ourself. The conflict arises from the fact that identification with the indwelling divinity requires a universal orientation which seems to be opposed to our personal interests. How do we embrace the world without throwing our personal interests away and vice versa? A good example can be seen in the world political scene. The inability to solve the seeming conflict between the divine self and the person was the cause behind the bloody conflict between communism, a governmental system that exalted universal interests over personal, and capitalism, which is the opposite. Again, the problem lies not in the realities themselves, but in the logical intellect with its narrow and illusory definitions. Once thinking is shut down to allow the wisdom faculty to manifest this knowledge, it will become known that identification with the indwelling divinity as oneself gives one the spiritual powers to satisfy the needs of the person and the whole at the same time. This cannot be even imagined as long as one is looking at life from the perspective of the person with its limited resources, the logical intellect, imagination, etc. We must realize that we are just not dealing with an issue of embracing the idea of choosing universal concerns over personal. The concern is with empowering the God within to surrender to it, to enable it to guide our personal and social affairs. It is a win-win effect. The close relationship between Asar and Aset, spheres 1 and 9, is shown in the icon of Asar, an eye, primarily symbolizing Asar, under or next to a seat, symbol of Aset. The 2 through 8 conflict, knowing versus being informed. This theme is the subject of this chapter. The conflicts that arise here stem from the fact that our earth-acquired information and logical faculty have helped man achieve a great deal in life. We pride ourselves on being good thinkers, and we wrap ourselves in the security blanket of reason. That we should suppress our reasoning and earthly information and rely primarily, for the most part, for the most important issues of our lives, on a non-thinking process is something that the uninitiated cannot fathom. The conflict is only illusory and is easily resolved with the realization that the two faculties have different spheres of activities. Wisdom has nothing to do with finite facts. A sage's knowledge has nothing to do with the knowledge of how to perform technical and mathematical operations. That is the function of the intellect, symbolized in the Kamitic tradition by Tehuti's baboon, who was employed to read the scales in the weighing of the heart, will ceremony. Conversely, the syllogistic logical intellect is incapable of handling the issues of man's life, for the simple fact that there is nothing in it that can process the reality of the divine part of man's being, sphere 3 on up to 0. In fact, as we will see, it cannot even process the realities of the fourth sphere, which is the part of the mind that is in charge of establishing the truth of the premises used in logical processing. We must recall the fact that the intellect, sphere 8, regardless of how high the IQ, is unable to establish the truth or fallacy of the premises it uses in its logical processing. This is where the wisdom faculty, sphere 2, Tehuti, and the truth faculty, sphere 4, Ma'at, come in. The 3-7 conflict. The emotional attitudes of the faculties of the third sphere, Seker, wherein resides God's spiritual power in us, and of the seventh sphere, Het Heru, the creative visualization, are direct opposites of each other. While the emotional support of Het Heru is joy for the things of the world, the emotional support of Seker is joy for God dwelling within. While the Het Heru faculty requires that we be conditioned to worldly things, Seker requires that we transcend them. This seeming conflict is resolved by Tehuti, which instructs us that nothing is enjoyable in itself, and that our natural state of being is the undifferentiated state of our energy matter, peace. We can thus find equal enjoyment in all things. Thus, in giving up the enjoyment of things, if we have to, we do not have to give up enjoyment. In fact, we do not need anything in order to enjoy life. It can and must proceed from our will. It is the inability to realize this truth that prevents people from transcending their love, quote unquote, for the things of the world, that they may acquire the powers of the Spirit. It has to be this way because divine power cannot be conferred on people who have no control over their emotions or understanding of their self. This close relationship between Sekher, deity of Egypt's major cemetery, Saqqara, Sekher, and Het-Heru, goddess of beauty, joy, and pleasure, was signaled in the fact that she was made to perform her pleasure-bringing role to the deceased. This relationship still survives in many African cultures, where the funeral ceremony ends in joyous dancing and merrymaking. The 4-6 conflict, freedom versus divine law. We live in a world governed by a web of interdependent and mutually related entities and events. The understanding of the totality and integration of these relationships is divine law. Nothing, therefore, in this world is free. That is unrelated or independent of something else or the whole. Man's will, which is the potential to act, the instrument through which choices are made, is the only thing in the world that can initiate an act that flows outside of divine law. Man was given this freedom because he/she is made in the likeness of God for the purpose of enabling God's full expression in the world. God must come through a vehicle that is equipped with the capability of unlimited potential. Unfortunately, man, not understanding his/her role and nature, misuses this faculty. It is given to us that we may ignore the impulses of the lower part of our being and thus control it, but instead we capitulate to it and use our freedom to disobey the laws of God. The resolution of the apparent conflict between divine law and the freedom of the will eludes man because of the popular belief, born of immaturity, that the laws are restrictive and bad. The conflict is resolved as soon as it is realized that divine law is not a set of rules, moral or otherwise, but the understanding of the undeniable interrelationships and interdependence between things. Ignore them in your decision-making process, declaration of your will, and you must fail. Observe them, and you must succeed. The close relationship between Ma'at, Sphere 4, and Heru, Sphere 6, is seen in the iconography of the weighing of the heart. The heart, symbolizing man's will and conscience, is weighed against the feather, symbol of Ma'at, divine law. The feather assimilates through metonymy the use of birds as symbols of freedom, as the bird is a metaphor for freedom, free as a bird, a lark. So is its part, the feather. In this manner, it comes to symbolize the lack of coercion and force in God's presentation of divine law to man, in opposition to the coercive impulses of the passions that otherwise dominate the will. A will, heart, that chooses divine law and act free of coercion, as opposed to one that has been dominated by passions, will be light as a feather, along with the conscious. Incidentally, this is a great example of syllogistic reasoning, which, according to Western Egyptologists, the ancient Egyptians were incapable of. The 5-5 conflict, justice versus vengeance. The fifth sphere is not paired with any other sphere, and speaking of a 5-5 conflict may seem nonsensical. First of all, let's note the beauty of the tree's design in assigning to the faculty that renders justice an unpaired or uncompromised place. The fifth sphere is the mathematical center of the tree. The sixth is its geometric, and stands thus at the midpoint between the self, sphere 1, and the person, sphere 9. When consciousness functions out of it, depending on how well the lower part has been subdued, there may be an inclination to vengeance or the execution of justice according to the laws of Ma'at. Vengeance, which is an expression of the persona, ninth sphere, and the animal, spirit, sphere 10, is to be rejected on the grounds that it violates the stability of the social order and jeopardizes the spirituality of the perpetrator. To summarize this section on the resolution of the 5 fundamental sources of conflict, we must pay attention to the fact that these conflicts are not real, but are created by the inability of the intellect, even if its IQ top 200, to establish the truth or falsehood of the premises it uses in its logical operations, as well as its separation of the components of the world into essentially separate existences. The Sahu man experiences the world through a cacophony of definitions, descriptions, names, and logical conclusions. It is for this reason that intellectualism, the Sebao, the eighth sphere, were designated as the enemies of Osar, unity. It was the role of Tehuti to overthrow these enemies on the night of weighing words, the Keher Uchao Metu. This was accomplished, as we have seen, through the resolution of the 5 fundamental antagonisms that are at the root of all conflicts in the world. In the Osirian theology, the divine order, and thus the world, was placed in jeopardy because Set, the Kamitic Satan, which represents the will of man in rebellion against the divine law, Ma'at, usurped the reins of the government of the world. Suffering and cruelty without end broke out as the world was ruled on the basis of man's intellect, imagination, and desire nature, in place of God's wisdom, spiritual power, and unifying presence. This wicked order was opposed by Heru, which represents the will of man in obedience to divine law. Left to themselves, they sought to annihilate each other, and that is what Heru would have done had Tehuti not found a proper resolution to the conflict, which was achieved by acknowledging the proper role and place for the higher and lower aspects of man's being. In other words, the solution of conflicts is achieved through the weighing aspect of measuring. One of the greatest accomplishments of ancient Egypt, of which the Western world is totally oblivious, was the development of the means to assign numerical objectivity, that is, to weigh or measure scientifically the concepts of theology, philosophy, sociology, psychology, in short, the humanities. This was accomplished by the Tree of Life, which, by assigning to its concept a place in its hierarchy, establishes a scale of values through which the concept of the various humanities can be objectively evaluated. Law, understood as the expression of the interdependence and mutual relationships between things, which is placed on the fourth sphere, is higher in value than the will and freedom, which are placed on the sixth sphere. It was in this capacity that Tehuti was associated with the moon, which in most ancient times was the most important and prominent means of measurement. Through the moon, the world's first calendars, which were used for the regulation of agriculture, rituals, and many civil events, were based on the moon. From another perspective, the moon, which also was used as a symbol of dreams, was associated with Tehuti as resolver of conflicts, because it is in dreams that many of the inner conflicts in our lives are worked out. Such a multifaceted use of symbolism is not foreign to poetry, and especially to the Kamitians with their extensive use of metaphor in their language and literature. Unfortunately, this has not been understood by Western scholars, who interpret the host of Kamitic metaphors in a very literal sense. Thus we get such foolish interpretations of Tehuti, the moon god, Asor, the corn god, etc. Oracles, surrogate wisdom faculties. All of the above benefits from the wisdom faculties can be achieved, provided that a society has a sage or two in its midst. We must recall the fact that the reception of guidance from God requires the ability to shut down the thought processes. As very few people achieve this spiritual skill, especially in today's world, which is virtually devoid of spiritual skill training centers, sages have brought forth devices through which people can receive external guidance from the indwelling God. These devices are the oracles that are operated through the casting of lots, as opposed to trans-mediumistic oracles, which belong to the ninth sphere faculty. Although the world has seen many such oracles, only a few can truly be classified as expressions of the wisdom faculty. The Ifa oracle of the Yoruba, the I Ching of the Chinese, and the ancient Egyptian Metu Neter oracle, which I retrieved from the Akashic records in 1980 and published in 1990, Metu Neter Volume 1. These oracles, unlike fortune-telling devices such as the tarot, playing cards, and so on, give insight into the inquirer's relationship with the laws of God, and on the basis of this renders a prophecy, many of which are conditional to corrective efforts that can be taken to avoid disaster, ameliorate ills, enhance success, etc. Assignments. The night preceding day 3 of TOLM, Tehuti Contemplative Meditation. 1. Review the material given in this chapter, as well as the preceding sections wherein Tehuti was discussed. Additional data should be looked up through the index. 2. Go into trance using the instructions given in Chapter 5. You may also have a TOLM partner assist you with trance induction through Ari Sang Ankh. Once you are in a trance, number 3, see signs of trance in Chapter 5, recall to mind, i.e. contemplate, situations in which you violate the laws of Tehuti in regards to the area of your life, career, relationships, health, etc. you are currently working on or rectifying. In every area of life, errors are made by confusing the information acquired in life with knowing. Other violations that are specific to the Tehuti laws of being concerned, the Tehuti laws of being concern the inputting of qualities to things, and the misinterpretation of our conditionings are natural behavioral responses. In our careers, marriages, financial pursuits, etc., will also be seen violations of the 4 fundamental sets of conflicts in our lives. Many people will find it difficult, not that it is in itself, as nothing is, to understand and accept, let alone implement the fact that the highest part of our being demands that we maintain inner peace in the face of any and all challenges in life. Write down these situations as detailed scenarios. Take note of when, where, and with whom that is said and done in your situation. You will use this scenario in your work in the days ahead. If you are not able to maintain yourself in trance as you perform this introspection, continue with the deep breathing throughout the contemplation. 4. The following questions will also assist you in your introspection. Preliminary Tehuti questions. 1. Do you believe that there are things and or situations that possess the quality of beauty that are frightening, disgusting, depressing, uplifting, and so on? 2. Do you believe that there are some conflicts that are unresolvable? 3. Do you place more trust in the development of worldly knowledge than spiritual intuition as a means of making it in life? If you answered yes to any of these questions, do not proceed to the main Tehuti questions. You have 0 points. Main Tehuti questions. It is of utmost importance to note that the answers to these questions are to be sought in what your behavior shows and not what you say about the subject, i.e., the question concerns your ability to do and not just your knowledge of the subject. 1. Are you able to arrive at the solution of all life's problems for yourself and others through intuition, i.e., by shutting down the thought processes? If your answer is yes, i.e., you can do this, you have 145 points. If no, 0 points. Day 3 of TOLM, Tehuti Assignment. From this day on, you must make the effort to observe the laws of Tehuti in regards to the area of life you are now seeking to rectify, and to whatever area the insight spills over. As this is the very beginning of the process, and there are many other sets of violations, 9 more to be exact, do not be concerned over the fact that you may not be succeeding in your efforts. Of chief importance is giving respect to the presence of God in your spirit by resisting acting from emotional and sensual influences. Review your Amen and Asar scenarios and make the effort to continue observing them. The revelations from these experiences will show you the relationships between Amen's inner peace and the unification of the elements of one's being, Asar, and the ability to shut down the thinking process upon which depends the wisdom of Tehuti's faculty.